Before the saloons, the shootouts, the sunsets, there was a problem. Rockstar had mastered chaos in modern cities, but when they tried to build the West, their tech fell apart. What followed wasn't a patch or a workaround, it was a full-on rebuild, from zero. See, Red Dead Redemption doesn't just look like the Wild West, it feels like you're living in it. And that feeling came from one brutal, make-or-break decision Rockstar made. A decision that devoured years of development time, but ended up redefining immersive game design. Mid-2000s. Rockstar's killing it with Grand Theft Auto. Cities, cars, crime, they've got it locked. But someone in a meeting says, "What if we made a cowboy game?" And just like that, everything shifts. Their engine, Rage, was built for dense cities and pavement, not vast plains and campfires. The Wild West needed dynamic lighting, realistic weather, horses that move like animals, not just vehicles with legs. Trying to retrofit that into their old engine would have been like using a sports car to plow a field. It might move, but not for long. So Rockstar made a call that most studios wouldn't dare touch. They didn't just tweak. They tore it all down and built something entirely new. And when I say new, I mean down to how grass reacts to wind. This wasn't an upgrade. This was reinvention. At the code level. Thing is, building an engine isn't like making a game. It's like constructing a house from the dirt up, laying the foundation, wiring the circuits, plumbing the walls, before you even think about design. Every system depends on every other. Break one, and everything collapses. The team had to make horses feel like real, breathing creatures, with distinct personalities and believable physics. They weren't just ticking boxes. Weather wasn't just a visual effect. Rain had to actually change the world, making surfaces slippery, messing with visibility, and even altering NPC behavior. Snow? It needed to pile up realistically and impact gameplay. Building all this from scratch was a massive technical challenge. Now, about the scope. Red Dead wasn't a small indie experiment. Rockstar aimed for their next huge open world. That meant the engine had to juggle hundreds of NPCs, complex AI, physics for everything from tumbleweeds to train crashes. And all of this had to run smoothly on the aging Xbox 360 and PS3 hardware. Development quickly turned into a behemoth project, lasting way longer than anyone expected. Imagine spending years building tools and systems, with zero actual gameplay to show. Trying to justify to executives that after 3 years, the grass physics are finally great. That's the kind of pressure the devs faced. But here's the real mind-blower. They weren't just crafting an engine for one game. They were laying the groundwork for what would become one of gaming's most beloved franchises. The engine behind the original Red Dead laid the foundation for Red Dead Redemption 2. Still hailed as one of the most impressive technical achievements in games, years after release. The attention to detail that was possible because of this custom engine is honestly ridiculous. We're talking about horse testicles that shrink in cold weather, individual blades of grass that react to your character walking through them, and weather systems so realistic that you can track animals by following their footprints in the mud after it rains. None of this would have been possible if they had just used an off-the-shelf solution. Looking back, this decision to build a new engine was simultaneously the smartest and most stressful thing Rockstar could have done. It delayed the game for years, cost them millions of dollars, and probably gave a lot of developers some serious sleepless nights. But it also created something that nobody else in the industry has been able to replicate. A game world that feels genuinely alive in ways that still blow people's minds today. The crazy part is that this is just how Rockstar operates. While other studios are focused on getting games out quickly, Rockstar is over here saying, what if we spent 5 years making sure the mud looks perfect? And honestly, it works. Red Dead Redemption didn't just succeed because of its story or characters. It succeeded because the world itself became a character. And that was only possible because of the insane amount of work that went into building the perfect engine for it. But wait, it gets even crazier. Building the perfect engine was just step one. Once they had the tools to create their Wild West world, they realized they actually had to know what the Wild West was really like. And I'm not talking about watching a few John Wayne movies and calling it research. Rockstar went absolutely unhinged with their commitment to historical accuracy. We're talking about a level of research that would make university professors jealous. The team didn't just Google, "What did cowboys wear?" and call it a day. They hired actual historians, spent months reading primary sources from the 1800s, and dove deep into archives that most people have never even heard of. They wanted to understand not just what life looked like in 1899, but what it felt like, smelled like, and sounded like. The movie research alone was insane. They weren't just watching the obvious stuff like the good, the bad, and the ugly or unforgiven. They went deep into film history, studying everything from silent westerns from the 1920s to obscure foreign films that captured different aspects of frontier life. They analyzed camera angles, lighting techniques, and color palettes to figure out how to make their game feel cinematic, but also authentic to the time period. Books became their obsession. The team was reading everything from famous Western novels to random diaries written by actual settlers and outlaws. They found letters written by people living through the decline of the frontier, newspaper clippings from small towns, and even shopping catalogs from the 1890s to understand what everyday objects looked like. Someone at Rockstar probably knows more about 19th century bootmaking techniques than most museum curators at this point. Rockstar teams actually went on field trips like they were in elementary school, except instead of going to the zoo, they were visiting ghost towns, historical sites, and museums across the American Southwest. They walked through abandoned mining towns, studied the architecture of old saloons, and probably spent way too much time looking at antique firearms in museum display cases. Every single building style in the game is based on actual architectural patterns from specific regions and time periods. The way people talk isn't just cowboy movie speak. It's based on actual dialects and speech patterns from the 1800s that they found in historical recordings and written accounts. Even the graffiti and posters you see on walls are recreations of actual advertisements and signs from that era. For Red Dead Redemption 2, they somehow managed to go even harder. They brought in experts on everything from horse breeding to textile manufacturing. They studied how different fabrics would have looked after months of wear, how leather ages in different climates, and even how mud would stick to different types of boots. There's probably someone at Rockstar who became an accidental expert on 19th century dental hygiene just because they wanted Arthur's teeth to look historically accurate. The wildlife research was next level too. They didn't just look up what animals lived in the Wild West and throw them in the game. They studied migration patterns, breeding seasons, and animal behaviors specific to different regions and times of year. They wanted to make sure that if you saw a particular bird in a specific area during winter, it would actually make sense from a biological standpoint. That's the kind of detail that 99% of players will never notice, but it makes the world feel real on a subconscious level. The Wild West wasn't just cowboys and shootouts. It was a time of incredible violence, racism, and social upheaval. Instead of glossing over these realities or turning them into cartoon villains, Rockstar did the hard work of understanding the historical context and presenting it in a way that was honest but still playable. That kind of nuanced approach only comes from really deep research and understanding. So while one team was figuring out how to make horse physics work, another team was reading 150-year-old journals to understand how people actually interacted with horses in daily life. It's like they were building a time machine and a history textbook at the same time. This obsessive research approach is honestly what separates Red Dead from every other Western game ever made. Most developers would just copy what they've seen in movies and call it good enough. But Rockstar went so deep that they probably know more about life in 1899 than some people who actually lived through it. And that knowledge shows in every single detail of the game, from the way characters hold their coffee cups to the specific types of weeds growing beside the railroad tracks. Now, if you thought the research was intense, wait until you hear about the script writing process. We're not talking about your typical video game script here. Most games might have like 50 to 100 pages of dialogue and call it a day. Red Dead Redemption? Try over 1,000 pages. Red Dead Redemption 2? We're talking about a script that's longer than most fantasy novel series combined. This thing was absolutely massive. To put this in perspective, your average Hollywood movie script is around 90 to 120 pages. A really dialogue-heavy TV show might hit 50 to 60 pages per episode. Rockstar looked at those numbers and said, "Cute, but we're building an entire world here." The script for RDR 2 alone was reportedly over 2,000 pages of pure dialogue, And that's not even counting all the ambient conversations, random NPC chatter, and interactive dialogue trees. The reason for this insane length wasn't just Rockstar showing off. It was because Red Dead had to be fundamentally different from Grand Theft Auto in terms of storytelling. GTA games are amazing, but they're basically satirical crime comedies where you're this chaotic force wreaking havoc on society. The story serves the gameplay, which is mostly about causing mayhem in creative ways. Red Dead needed to flip that relationship completely. For Red Dead, the story had to be the heart of everything. These weren't just games about shooting people in the Wild West. They were character studies about the end of an era, the cost of loyalty, and what happens when the world changes faster than you can adapt to it. That kind of emotional depth doesn't happen by accident. It requires an absolutely ridiculous amount of writing, character development, and dialogue that feels real and meaningful. Think about Arthur Morgan from RDR 2 for a second. That character has more depth and development than most movie protagonists, and he's just one character in a massive ensemble cast. The writers had to create his entire personality, backstory, relationships with every other gang member, his personal philosophy, his sense of humor, his fears, his regrets, and then write thousands of lines of dialogue that consistently reflected all of that. And they had to do this for dozens of major characters. But it wasn't just the main characters that needed this treatment. Every single person you can talk to in these games needed to feel like a real person with their own story. The dialogue trees alone must have been a nightmare to manage. Unlike linear games where you know exactly what the player will hear and when, Red Dead had to account for players approaching conversations in completely different orders, with different relationship levels, at different points in the story. And we haven't even talked about the ambient dialogue yet. You know those conversations you overhear while walking through town, or the random things gang members say around camp? All of that had to be written too. Someone sat down and wrote hundreds of variations of small talk between NPCs so that the world would feel alive even when you're not directly interacting with anyone. They created entire conversations about the weather, local gossip, and daily life that most players will never fully hear. Characters needed different things to say depending on the weather, the time of day, what chapter of the story you're in, what you're wearing, what horse you're riding, and about a million other variables. Arthur might comment on your outfit, the weather, a recent mission, or something he noticed in the environment, and all of these comments had to feel natural and contextually appropriate. The campfire conversations alone probably took months to write. These weren't just random chatter. They were carefully crafted moments that revealed character backstories, built relationships between gang members, and provided exposition about the world and the story. What's really wild is that all of this dialogue had to be historically appropriate too. Remember all that research we talked about? Every single line had to sound like something someone from 1899 would actually say, using vocabulary and speech patterns that were accurate to the time period and region. The writers couldn't just have characters talk like modern people. They had to essentially learn a historical dialect and write thousands of pages of dialogue in it. Honestly, the fact that Red Dead's dialogue feels as natural and engaging as it does is kind of miraculous when you consider the sheer volume of writing involved. Most games with scripts this long would feel bloated or repetitive, but Red Dead manages to make almost every conversation feel meaningful and authentic. But the writing was just one piece of the authenticity puzzle. When Rockstar decided they wanted Red Dead to be as historically accurate as possible, they basically committed themselves to recreating an entire functioning society from 1899. And I mean everything, from how people robbed trains to how much a can of beans cost at the general store. The level of detail they achieved is honestly borderline obsessive. Let's start with something that sounds simple but is actually incredibly complex: the economics of the game world. In most games, money is just a number that goes up when you complete missions and goes down when you buy stuff. But Rockstar wanted Red Dead's economy to actually reflect what life was like in the late 1800s. They researched historical prices for everything from ammunition to alcohol, then adjusted those prices to account for regional differences and economic conditions. A single bullet in Red Dead costs way more relative to your income than bullets cost in modern games, because bullets were actually expensive and precious in 1899. Same thing with horses. They weren't just transportation. They were major investments that people saved up for and took care of like family members. Rockstar really didn't left no stone untouched to make it one of the best game of all time. And this is how Rockstar build RDR worlds. What other game behind the scenes do you want to see next? Let me know in the comments section. Subscribe to the channel and see ya.